Success can come at a high price, and sometimes that high price can be psychosis. Hi, my name is Dr. Natalie Jones. I spent several years working at psych emergency and inpatient facilities. And one of the things that I notice is that a lot of times with adults who are super high achievers, can have a psychotic break in, that high achievement can be the trigger. The stress associated with high achievement can be the trigger for a psychotic break, and that typically happens early in their 20s. In one of the populations that I worked with, I don't really hear a lot of people talking about, but it would happen, my experience anyway, is working with the Asian community. And what I found, I'm working with these communities where these people were super duper academically smart, top of their class. They would go to med school and be doing all of the things, but then at a certain point, there would be something super stressful, some sort of finals or something that would just sort of cause them to have a break in psychosis. And a lot of times it would happen like right around their second year of med school or like residency. It would be like during a super critical time. In stress can be a trigger for psychosis, extreme stress. So you have people that are, they're staying up for like 2-3 weeks straight. They're studying. Their diet is not as good as it should be because they're so stressed out. And all they're really focused on is their studies. And there's a lot of pressure to pass, and not only to pass, but to, be at the top of their class. So they have this internalized pressure from themselves. They have pressure at home, from their parents and, their community and things like that, where there's this expectation that, my child is going to be a top of the line doctor. And so what would happen would be like at some point during the semester, they would start having psychotic symptoms, which, a lot of times with people with severe mental illness, one of the ways that, they kind of set themselves apart is that people with severe mental illness will a lot of times try to overcompensate and try to appear to be as normal as possible. And even to their own detriment. And then, something would happen where, their parents wouldn't hear from them for a while. And so then, they would either go do a wellness check themselves or have someone else do it. And then they would find them just sort of in their room, not been eating or just sort of talking to themselves from being psychotic, excuse me. And so, of course, they would bring them to the hospital. And sometimes, these young people could recover from that and, just sort of give themselves a break from school. But sometimes there's sometimes when people don't ever recover from psychosis and do have to end up leaving, med school or whatever their high performing career is, just because, any extreme amount of stress triggers them to go straight back to psychosis. And I'm talking about severe psychosis where, people would just be hearing things, sort of talking to themselves, but they would also have something called catatonia, which is where their muscles could become rigid. And, sometimes you'd have people that would just stand in the same spot or just have this weird, like sort of abnormal, like movement with their limbs, where it'd just be like, it would be stuck. And, they'd have to be given drugs and sort of, antipsychotic drugs and monitored for a period of time. What was I going to say? I was going to say a good example of something like this, which I've mostly seen in Asian communities. I maybe have seen it once or twice with African American people. Again, where it's just like this, from this psychotic break due to high achieving performance, high stress. high stress performance, which, a lot of times comes from an authoritarian household where, your child you expect your child to be the top of the line and perform all the time and study, study, study. And it's like, that is a huge part of their identity. And, there's this huge pressure to perform within certain standards. But anyhow, and I've seen it, mostly again in Asian communities, once or twice with African Americans. But an example of this, I think a really good example of this is, it's a classic movie. It's probably one of my top 5 favorite movies, with the legendary Miss Diana Ross. I think she did a phenomenal job on this. And this movie is called Out of Darkness, and I don't think you can get it anywhere. I think it's actually her best film, and I never hear anybody talk about it. But anyhow, she portrays this very similar scenario where she's like a med school student, high achieving, high performing, and then she has a psychotic break. And it was a movie filmed I think it was during the early 70s. And, they were doing these drug trials of like Thorazine and things like that. And, so she's not responding to medication. She's kind of found walking naked in the street in some precarious situations. And I think, once again, she's in, med school, and, she's on all these drugs, and she has to stay in the hospital for quite some time until they're able to find the right drug combination, and she's able to acclimate. But she becomes paranoid schizophrenia, struggles with paranoid schizophrenia. And essentially she always has this desire to go back to med school, but she can never go back, just because it triggers that paranoid psychotic state. And it's very similar to what I've seen. And I think this movie's phenomenal. It's the closest representation of what I've seen of paranoid schizophrenia and psychotic break when people are in high stress, high performance situations like this. I don't know that she got an award for that, but that's an exact example. It's the closest thing I've ever seen to it. And she's, she had become homeless, and her life just went down a totally different trajectory. And, so that represents that. But yeah, too much stress can definitely trigger psychosis, paranoid psychosis. And sometimes young people aren't able to come back from that. Unfortunately, a lot of times they are, but not all the time.